Welcome to the Dark History Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Carter. In the corridors of American history, a chilling echo resounds, one that speaks of a time when the basic rights to procreate were forcibly stripped from tens of thousands of individuals. The Eugenics movement, a dark chapter that spanned the early 20th century, sought to improve the human race by selectively breeding out undesirable traits. The vehicle for this misguided quest for genetic purity? Forced sterilization. Imbued with a horrifying blend of racism, classism, and ableism, the movement targeted those deemed unfit to procreate. The poor, the disabled, the mentally ill, and ethnic minorities bore the brunt of this brutal campaign. Under the guise of public health and welfare, these individuals were deemed subpar, their reproductive rights wantonly violated in the name of progress. The genesis of this movement lies in the theories of Sir Francis Galton, cousin of Charles Darwin, who first posited the idea of improving human stock through selective breeding. His ideas found fertile ground in America, where the zeitgeist of the early 1900s was heavily influenced by the burgeoning field of genetics and the socially divisive impacts of immigration and industrialization. State-sanctioned sterilization laws began cropping up across the country as early as 1907, with Indiana leading the charge. By the 1930s, more than half of the states in the Union had such laws on their books. The victims of these policies were often individuals trapped in the margins of society, residents of state institutions, prisoners, and those deemed feeble-minded or morally deficient. One such case was that of Carrie Buck, an 18-year-old woman committed to the Virginia State Colony for epileptics and feeble-minded in 1924. Deemed genetically unfit for procreation because of her alleged feeble-mindedness and the moral delinquency of her mother and daughter, Carrie was forcibly sterilized under the auspices of the recently passed Virginia Sterilization Act. The Buck v. Bell case reached the Supreme Court, which in 1927 delivered a devastating decision. Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., writing for the majority, declared, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough." With those chilling words, the highest court in the land gave its sanction to eugenic sterilization. The legacy of this decision reverberates through the decades, an insidious echo that haunts the collective conscience. Forced sterilization did not end with the close of the eugenics era. Instead, it morphed, found new targets, new justifications. Even today, we grapple with the lingering effects of this horrific chapter, seeking ways to reckon with and make amends for these past atrocities. But to understand fully the depth and breadth of this issue, we must delve deeper into the specifics. Let us trace the path of the eugenics movement, its proponents, its victims, and its enduring legacy. This journey takes us into the heart of a dark chapter, revealing the horrific consequences of a misguided quest for genetic perfection. The eugenics movement, at its core, was driven by the belief that humanity could and should be improved through controlled breeding. It gained traction in the United States, largely due to the efforts of Charles Davenport, a prominent biologist, and Harry Laughlin, a former teacher. Both men were heavily influenced by the work of Sir Francis Galton, an English scientist who was an early proponent of eugenics. Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin, took the theories of natural selection and evolution and applied them to human society, proposing that with deliberate intervention, the human race could be improved. In 1910, Davenport and Laughlin established the Eugenics Record Office, ERO, at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory in New York. The ERO became a hub for eugenic research and propaganda, collecting data on American families and disseminating information about the supposed dangers of unfit traits. Laughlin, as the superintendent of the ERO, developed a model sterilization law in 1922. This law, which advocated for the sterilization of the socially inadequate, was used as a template by many states and led to thousands of forced sterilizations. The victims of these laws were among society's most vulnerable. Those targeted were often poor, uneducated, or from minority groups. They were labeled as feeble-minded, sexually promiscuous, or mentally ill. These victims were deemed unfit to procreate based on flawed criteria and pseudoscientific beliefs about heredity. The sterilization procedures were often carried out without the victim's full understanding or consent. Many were led to believe they were undergoing a different procedure, or that sterilization was a condition of their release from a state institution. The humiliation, pain, and violations suffered by these individuals is a chilling testament to the length society can go in pursuit of an ideal. While the eugenics movement lost favor following World War II, forced sterilizations continued well into the latter part of the 20th century. In the 1960s and 1970s, these procedures were disproportionately performed on minority women under the guise of population control and welfare reform. This later phase of forced sterilization, often overshadowed by the earlier eugenic sterilizations, is a stark reminder that the fight for reproductive justice is far from over. The victims of forced sterilization bear the physical and emotional scars of a deeply flawed system. Their stories serve as a sobering reminder of the dangers inherent in the misuse of science and the violation of human rights in the name of progress. The people who implemented and enforced forced sterilization weren't anonymous figures. They were individuals in positions of power, who used their influence to shape policy and practice. Amongst these key figures were doctors, politicians, and leaders of institutions who pushed the eugenics agenda, often under the guise of societal progress and health. Harry Laughlin, as previously mentioned, was a prominent figure in this movement. As the superintendent of the Eugenics Record Office, Laughlin advocated for sterilization laws across the United States. His model sterilization law, developed in 1922, was adopted by many states, leading to thousands of forced sterilizations. Another significant character was Dr. Albert Priddy, the superintendent of the Virginia State Colony for Epileptics and Feeble-Minded. Priddy was a staunch supporter of eugenics and a key player in the infamous case of Buck v. Bell. He championed the sterilization of Carrie Buck, an 18-year-old girl deemed feeble-minded, in a bid to prevent her from having socially inadequate offspring. Political players were also embroiled in this dark chapter of American history. Governors, state legislators, and even the Supreme Court played roles in sanctioning forced sterilizations. The sterilization of Carrie Buck, for instance, was upheld by the Supreme Court in 1927, with Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes infamously declaring, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough." Beyond these key figures were the structures that enabled such horrifying practices. State institutions across the country, such as mental hospitals, prisons, and homes for the feeble-minded, were at the forefront of implementing forced sterilizations. Patients at these institutions often had no say in their treatment and were subjected to sterilization without their informed consent. Moreover, the American eugenics movement was supported by prestigious bodies such as the Carnegie Institution and the Rockefeller Foundation. Both organizations provided significant funding for eugenic research and the propagation of eugenic ideology. Their support lent a veneer of credibility and respectability to the movement, allowing it to gain traction in social and political circles. In this historical backdrop, a grim picture emerges of how individuals and systems of power can collude to perpetrate gross human rights abuses. The forced sterilization program, driven by the eugenics movement, was an insidious form of control that targeted the most vulnerable in society. It is a chilling testament to the potential dangers of unchecked power and the misuse of science. The narrative of forced sterilization in America is fraught with countless stories of personal devastation. Many victims were young women, often from marginalized communities, who were sterilized without their knowledge or consent during routine medical procedures. The violation was not only physical, but also psychological, as women were robbed of their ability to bear children, a core aspect of their identity and autonomy. One such victim was Elaine Riddick Jesse. As a 14-year-old African-American girl living in North Carolina, she was deemed feeble-minded and promiscuous after becoming pregnant as a result of rape. After giving birth, she was sterilized without her knowledge or consent. It wasn't until years later, when she attempted to start a family with her husband, that she learned about the irreversible procedure that had been performed on her. Her story, unfortunately, was not unique. Thousands of others, particularly women of color, the poor, and the disabled, were subject to similar fates, often under the guise of public good. The sterilization program targeted those deemed unfit to reproduce, reinforcing social hierarchies based on race, class, and ability. The victims were often powerless, their voices unheard, and their rights trampled upon in the pursuit of a misguided vision of societal improvement. Such stories also expose the collusion between medical professionals and state authorities. Doctors, often respected figures in communities, were instrumental in carrying out these procedures. They played a key role in identifying, recommending, and sterilizing individuals deemed unfit. This misuse of medical authority not only betrayed the trust placed in them by their patients, but also resulted in devastating, lifelong consequences for the victims. In institutions across the country, similar stories unfolded. In California, a state that accounted for a third of all sterilizations, thousands of patients in state mental hospitals were sterilized, often without their knowledge or consent. These procedures were carried out under the pretense of treatment, further exploiting the vulnerability of the patients. The legacy of forced sterilization is one of pain and trauma, casting a long shadow over the lives of its victims. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, pseudoscience, and social prejudice. It underscores the importance of vigilance in protecting the rights and dignity of the most vulnerable members of society. The stories of the victims, while harrowing, are crucial in understanding the full extent of this dark chapter in American history. The horrors of forced sterilization escalated dramatically with the endorsement of the U.S. Supreme Court in 1927. In the landmark case, Buck v. Bell, the court upheld a Virginia law that allowed the forced sterilization of individuals deemed unfit to reproduce. The law was challenged by Carrie Buck, a young woman who had been institutionalized and sterilized against her will, on the grounds that it violated her rights to due process and equal protection. However, the court ruled in favor of the state, with Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes infamously stating, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough." This ruling opened the floodgates for similar laws to be passed across the country, resulting in a surge in sterilization procedures. By the mid-20th century, an estimated 60,000 Americans had been forcibly sterilized. The victims were overwhelmingly from marginalized communities, immigrants, people of color, those living in poverty, and the mentally ill or disabled. The atrocity was not confined to any particular region or state. It was a nationwide phenomenon, reflecting deep-seated prejudices and a chilling disregard for individual rights and dignity. In some cases, sterilization was used as a weapon of social control, wielded against those who dared to defy societal norms or challenge the status quo. In North Carolina, for instance, a statewide sterilization program targeted women who were deemed too promiscuous or rebellious, under the pretext of protecting society from the offspring of such deviant individuals. The program was active until the 1970s, demonstrating the enduring persistence of such abuses of power. The atrocities were further compounded by the use of deception and coercion. Often victims were not informed about the nature of the procedure or its irreversible consequences. In other instances, they were manipulated into giving their consent under duress or false pretenses. In Puerto Rico, for example, a mass sterilization campaign was carried out under the guise of population control. By the late 1960s, roughly a third of Puerto Rican women of childbearing age had been sterilized, many without fully understanding the consequences of the procedure. The dark legacy of forced sterilization reveals a disturbing aspect of American history, characterized by racial and social prejudice, state-sanctioned violence, and gross violations of human rights. The painful stories of the victims serve as a grim reminder of the consequences when power is wielded without oversight, and medical authority is misused to further social biases. It underscores the necessity of remembering and acknowledging these atrocities to ensure they are never repeated. Despite the widespread magnitude of this horrifying practice, resistance to forced sterilization was significant, albeit often silent. Resistance took numerous forms and came from different quarters, reflecting the diverse experiences and perspectives of the victims and their support networks. In many instances, victims themselves were the first line of resistance. While some were deceived or coerced into undergoing sterilization, others fiercely resisted, refusing to submit to the procedure or giving false consent. Some even managed to escape the facilities where these procedures were performed. Their actions, rooted in a deep sense of personal agency and dignity, served as a powerful indictment of the system's inhumanity. Resistance also came from within the medical community. Some doctors and nurses refused to participate in forced sterilizations, despite the immense pressure from their superiors or the government. They upheld their Hippocratic oath, prioritizing their patients' well-being over the sinister designs of the state. The legal fraternity, too, played a crucial role in resisting these atrocities. Lawyers and human rights activists took up the cause of the victims, filing lawsuits to challenge the legality of state-sanctioned sterilizations. Some of these legal battles resulted in landmark judgments that underscored the inviolability of reproductive rights and laid the groundwork for future protections. However, the resistance was met with a chilling silence from much of society. The atrocities were largely ignored or tacitly accepted by a public conditioned by fear and prejudice. The media, a potential ally in shedding light on these abuses, often chose complicity over confrontation, further exacerbating the victims' sense of isolation and despair. This silence was not just a failure of empathy or understanding, but also a deliberate strategy employed by those in power. By suppressing information, discrediting victims, and sowing fear, they sought to stifle opposition and maintain the status quo. The silence, therefore, was not merely a lack of noise, but an oppressive void, a negation of voices crying out for justice. This complex interplay of resistance and silence shaped the narrative of forced sterilization, revealing a society deeply divided by race, class, and ideology. It also underlines the courage and resilience of those who dared to defy a system that sought to rob them of their most basic human rights. And while the silence may have been overwhelming at times, it was never absolute, punctuated by the voices of those brave enough to speak truth to power. Their stories continue to resonate, reminding us of the urgency and importance of confronting such horrors in all their forms head-on. In the grim panorama of forced sterilization, it is essential to recognize the tireless work of those who sought to expose the horrors and document them for posterity. These were the journalists, writers, and photographers who dared to venture into the heart of the darkness, shedding light on the atrocities that were being committed under the guise of public welfare. One of these brave individuals was a journalist named Alan Chase. Chase was deeply disturbed by the eugenic policies he saw being enacted around him, and he committed himself to investigating and exposing these practices. His seminal work, The Legacy of Malthus, The Social Costs of the New Scientific Racism, published in 1977, offered one of the first comprehensive critiques of eugenic sterilization. It was a damning indictment of the policies and the pseudoscience that underpinned them. In his book, Chase methodically dismantled the fallacies of eugenic thinking, demonstrating how it was used to justify social and racial inequalities. He highlighted individual cases of forced sterilization, detailing the suffering of victims and the callous disregard for their rights. His work resonated with many, and it played a pivotal role in mobilizing public opinion against forced sterilization. Among the photographers who documented this grim chapter was Dorothea Lange, renowned for her images of the Great Depression. Lange's haunting photographs captured the plight of the victims, their anguish, and their resilience. Her images served as a stark reminder of the human cost of these policies, making it impossible to ignore or dismiss their impact. These individuals, and many others like them, risked their careers and their safety to bring these stories to light. They faced threats, censorship, and ostracism, but they refused to be silenced. Their work stands as a testament to the power of truth and the courage of those who dare to speak it. Yet, even as these brave individuals worked tirelessly to expose the horrors of forced sterilization, the machinery of the state continued unabated. Even as the voices of dissent grew louder, the policies remained deeply entrenched, protected by a network of political, legal, and societal barriers. The courage of the few was met with the indifference and hostility of the many, culminating in a struggle that would define the very essence of human rights in America. The aftershocks of forced sterilization policies reverberated for generations, leaving deep scars on the victims and their families. The physical and psychological trauma inflicted by the operations was often compounded by the stigma and shame associated with infertility. Many victims were ostracized by their communities, and some even chose to conceal their sterilization, living out their lives in silent suffering. Efforts to seek justice for these atrocities were fraught with challenges. Lawsuits filed against the state were often dismissed due to statutes of limitations or lack of evidence. The burden of proof was unfairly placed on the victims, many of whom were poor, uneducated, and lacked the resources to navigate the complex legal system. In North Carolina, one of the few states to institute a compensation program, victims of involuntary sterilization could apply for financial reparations. Implemented in 2013, the program offered $50,000 to each verified victim. However, the process of applying and verifying claims was arduous. Many victims died before they could see any compensation. Advocacy groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center and ACLU have been instrumental in pushing for restitution and recognition for the victims. Their efforts have led to apologies from several state governments and renewed interest in compensating the victims. However, these are mere tokens in the face of the immense suffering endured by the victims. The legacy of forced sterilization continues to shape contemporary discussions on reproductive rights and medical ethics. The medical profession has been forced to reckon with its complicity in these atrocities. Calls for greater transparency, informed consent, and patient autonomy have gained traction as a direct response to the abuses of the past. The story of forced sterilization in America is a chilling reminder of how science can be manipulated to serve harmful ideologies. It underscores the importance of vigilance and critical inquiry in the face of authority. It serves as a testament to the resilience of those who endured and the courage of those who dared to challenge the status quo. The struggle for justice continues. As we reckon with this dark chapter in American history, the victims of forced sterilization demand recognition, restitution, and most importantly, a commitment that such atrocities will never be repeated. Their stories are a poignant reminder of the enduring power of resilience against the forces of injustice and inhumanity. The shadow of forced sterilization in America stretches long, its impact echoing into the present day. It pervades not only individual lives and families, but also society as a whole, shaping policies, attitudes, and the collective conscience. For the survivors and their descendants, the impact of these policies is deeply personal, often characterized by a sense of loss and violation. Many were robbed of their ability to have children, a choice that was brutally taken from them. The trauma of this experience continues to affect them, both physically and emotionally, their lives irrevocably altered by a decision made without their consent. The victims of forced sterilization have also faced societal stigma and discrimination. Sterilization was often justified on the grounds of improving the genetic pool, a notion that inherently devalues the lives and worth of those targeted. This has left an indelible mark on these communities, contributing to a legacy of marginalization and discrimination that persists to this day. The impact of forced sterilization is also reflected in the mistrust many marginalized communities harbor towards healthcare institutions. The betrayal by a system designed to protect and promote health is a deep wound that has yet to heal. This mistrust can lead to underutilization of healthcare services and poorer health outcomes, perpetuating a cycle of health disparities. The legacy of forced sterilization also extends to legal and policy realms. It has shaped the evolution of legal principles around informed consent, reproductive rights, and medical ethics. Some positive changes have emerged as a result, including stricter regulations on sterilization procedures and increased recognition of patient autonomy. But these changes, while important, are not enough to erase the horrors of the past. In the realm of bioethics, the atrocities of forced sterilization have led to a re-evaluation of the role of medical professionals in society. They underline the dangers of unchecked power and the potential for abuse when the sanctity of individual rights is overridden for perceived societal benefit. The lessons learnt from this grim chapter have informed the development of ethical guidelines and codes of conduct in medicine. The horrors of forced sterilization in America continue to reverberate, serving as a stark reminder of the potential for harm when power is misused and human rights are disregarded. It is a part of history that must not be forgotten, a lesson that must be heeded as society continues to grapple with questions of justice, equality, and human dignity. Despite the wealth of information we've covered, there are still many unanswered questions that linger. The full extent of the damage done by forced sterilization, both physically and psychologically, is hard to quantify. While we have data on the number of people sterilized, the true scale of the impact on communities, families, and individuals remains elusive. The effects have rippled outwards, influencing not just the victims but generations that followed. Families were broken up, potential lives erased, and the social and emotional fabric of communities torn apart. The deep-seated mistrust and fear engendered by these programs have had lasting effects. How can we measure the toll of such profound and enduring trauma? The issue of reparations also remains a contentious one. Some states have attempted to provide compensation to victims, but these efforts have been sporadic and inconsistent. There is no agreed-upon standard for reparations, and many victims have received nothing at all. What amount of money can compensate for so profound a violation? And what of the victims who are no longer alive to receive any form of redress? Moreover, forced sterilization is not simply a relic of the past. There are recent allegations of forced sterilizations happening in detention centers at the U.S. border, suggesting that this horrific practice may not be entirely eradicated. It raises the question, to what extent does this dark chapter of American history continue to unfold? Reflection on these horrors leads to contemplation of the broader dynamics of power and prejudice. Forced sterilization was not an isolated incident, but rather part of a broader pattern of systemic oppression and discrimination. It serves as a tragic example of how misguided notions of superiority can be weaponized, leading to gross violations of human rights. Forced sterilization was a disturbing manifestation of eugenics, but this belief system has manifested in other forms and continues to persist in subtler ways. It reminds us that the struggle for equality and human rights is ongoing, and the pernicious effects of prejudice and discrimination can permeate even the most trusted institutions. It also underscores the importance of vigilance and accountability in medicine and policymaking. It is a stark reminder that the potential for abuse exists wherever there is unchecked power. The lessons from this grim chapter of history illuminate the importance of safeguarding individual rights, promoting transparency, and fostering a culture of ethics and respect for human dignity. The horrors of forced sterilization in America are a potent reminder of the high cost of indifference and silence. Thanks for listening. This has been the Dark History Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.